Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. Today is February 14th. Gentlemen, if you haven't already, order your flowers for your lady because it's Valentine's Day. If you're already watching this, you're actually probably already up Schitt's Creek at this point. I'm joined, as usual, by Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford.
I remembered.
You would. You're from everything I can tell, Judy was very happy with you. At least she appears so when she's
She certainly knows the right thing to say.
Yeah.
And so do I.
A man a little less studied, but I think does a decent job. Corey?
Like to think so, but as Dave said, I'll probably hit the 7-Eleven on the way home to grab a chocolate rose or
That's
something.
normally what I do. This year, I actually ordered flowers for one of our reporters years ago when a family member passed away. And that good deed came back to help me because I got a text from the flower company yesterday. And I was like, oh, geez. So hopefully my wife is not watching and she just thinks I just did this remembering.
Spontaneous.
I don't remember these things. I'm not very good. All right. Well, we've got really interesting topics today. Good headlines. Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault says no more roads. Cities should stop building roads to encourage people to walk more. Get out of your car and walk from Calgary to Edmonton because that's good for the environment. You didn't say that exactly, but more or less saying that the federal government should stop using the gas tax fund to transfer money to municipalities for roads and instead just use it on bike paths and sidewalks, that kind of thing. The Auditor General's report into the ArriveScam app is out. How could the budget balloon from about $80,000 to what it did turn out to be $57 million approximately?
59 and change, I think.
Yeah.
The last count.
Yeah, that's a little over budget. How did costs given to this liberal aligned firm manage to explode by? I can't even do the math in my head. How many times is that?
The leader of the opposition said it was 750%. I checked his math. It was actually 746.
I think that's more than that. 80,000 to
80,000 to
59.5.
Yeah, well,
we're gonna have to do the math on that because that's just so many times over. I'm having a hard time.
Have the operations manager check it out.
Yeah. Justin Trudeau says that Pierre Poilievre wants to make Canada great again, and Canadians do not want Canada to be great again. A very interesting and bizarre exchange in the House of Commons. I mean, it's one thing to go after MAGA. Liberals don't like the MAGA thing, and it's fine to, I guess, fair game to go there. But saying Canadians do not want Canada to be great again, it's an interesting line of attack.
One thing's for sure, the war room in the Conservative Party has already got that clipped out and is working on the ad. So
it's already done. I'm sure they've already got 5 versions of that ad done. And, and Pierre Poilievre says he's going to kill the media subsidies. We'll see if we have time to get that far. Before we get into it, Corey, why don't you tell people about my favorite sponsor?
I'm guessing that must be the Canadian Shooting Sports Association.
It must be.
Yes, with Tony Bernardo. Those guys do a fantastic job. If you own firearms, plan to own firearms, you're a hunter, you're a target shooter, you're a collector, you have to be a member of this association. I mean, these guys stand up for you. They provide you resources to make sure you can protect your right and ability to use those firearms. And they, like any other association, provide all sorts of resources as well, whether it's for local shows or events and things such as that. So check them out, Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Their website is CSSA-CILA.org, or can just Google them, Canadian Shooting Sports Association. It's a membership well worth investing in for yourself.
Corey, you probably saw this in our pages just within the last 2 weeks. We had an article there from Tony updating our readers on what was going on in the government with regard to firearms.
Oh, yeah, they're on top of it.
Just search Bernardo and it'll come right up.
All right. Well, let's start here. So Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault, he says all sorts of funny things. And he gets away with it most of the time, at least outside of Alberta. But he seems to have really stepped in it on this one. He wants the federal government to stop funding. So the federal government collects billions of dollars every year in the gas tax. So that is a tax paid on fuel, presumably mostly by drivers, to and it's supposed to be used to be put towards roads for those drivers. And he says, well, we need to stop that. We're not going to stop collecting the gas tax. We're obviously going to keep collecting it, but that money should be used for things that are explicitly not for drivers paying the gas tax. This will encourage people to walk more. He's not incorrect about that. No roads means less driving. And presumably we can walk to Lethbridge from Calgary, if that's really what he wants. Nigel, he seems, actually, you were just telling me before we started, he held a presser just a few hours ago, and he's trying to back away from that position.
Well, I would hope he would. I mean, the trouble with Mr. Guilbeault, he's one of these very, very
sincere.
You said it right.
People.
I've been practicing in front of the mirror. He says he's very sincere, and every now and then the problem that sincere people have is that they tell you what they honestly really think. And he actually thinks that we should get out of our cars and walk more, or ride a bicycle. Now, to some degree, there is a limited argument in favor of that. I think we could all afford to take a walk for the sake of our hearts and our constitutions during the lunchtime. But I live, you live what, 10 miles from the office? I live 6.2 miles from the office. You come in from Prentice, for heaven's sake.
You're dating yourself using miles.
That's all I use.
I have no idea how many miles I am from the office.
Well,
but
16, and in my case, about 9. But anyway, however you do the maths, it's too far to walk, and it's too far to ride a bike unless you're one of these keeners. I have a suspicion, and I think I first had that suspicion when it was one of your columns in about April of 2022, when you were speculating that this was all about actually getting people to drive less and having a car a luxury, and we're all going to be in our 15-minute cities. We weren't going anywhere. And sure enough, it is now emerging that the electric cars aren't suitable for the environment. There's never going to be enough of them because people won't buy them. There will be less cars, and then he will be happy. So it all makes perfect sense. But I thought you were off on a conspiracy theory there at that time.
Well, sometimes I am.
Well, you weren't this time, were you?
Yeah, seems to be proving out a bit.
Yeah.
Well, as usual, today's conspiracy theories are tomorrow's government policy, something we saw too often during COVID. Cory, is this... did he give any indication about how much he wants the federal government to act on this? Is this going to be federal policy that the gas tax transfer cannot be used towards roads, or was he just kind of navel-gazing
specifics? But I mean, he certainly, the veil dropped for a minute, and we see the kind of direction he wants to go. I don't know if he's going rogue or if it's represented in the whole government. It does seem almost as if Justin Trudeau has just kind of given him free rein in environment, and the thing people have to realize with Guilbeault, he's the real thing. He's a nutter. He's an environmental extremist. If you might remember a long time back, I doubt Derek would, but there was Edmonton experimented with like a graduated ballot sort of thing for their city council. And this fellow named Tucker Gomberg managed to actually get a council position, which never normally ever would have happened. He proposed things like flooding the city streets so people could skate to work. This was an actual council proposition.
I remember this.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, he was actually quite disturbed, and he took his own life at the Confederation Bridge some years later, so which was tragic. I don't want to jump on the grave of the man, but he was an example of when you take a truly extreme activist and put them into a position with a little bit of authority. But that was still Edmonton City Council. Guilbeault is like the Gomberg of federal politics, and he's in a very position of serious federal authority, and that gets a little more scary because not only would he want to spread the streets with ice, perhaps, but he's got the ability to force it, and I think we're seeing a hint of where he'd like to go.
I mean, the man is nuts. He is a true believer, eco-fanatic, and this is the guy who would scale the CN Tower.
Ralph Klein's house.
He invaded Ralph Klein's private residence. Stuff that would normally put you off into a silo where you could play with your little friends, but you're regarded as so far outside the mainstream that you're not welcome in a so-called mainstream political party. But here he is in one of the most senior positions in the federal government wants to essentially shut down the electrical grid in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I know the Premier of Alberta had a pretty robust response to him yesterday.
Well, I think, yeah, about the roads, she said he just wasn't realistic. She made the same arguments that we're making here now, that the distances are too much. People have to be mobile, and he's just not accepting the grim realities. I mean, maybe you could reconstruct some large Canadian city like Toronto as a kind of a place where everybody gets around in public transit, but it's just plain not going to work in the rest of the country. Good for the Premier for making that point, for sticking with it, and for once again holding up Mr. Guilbeault to derision that he so richly deserves. Bless her heart.
All right. Well, a little less crazy, but a little more traditional liberal corruption era. I mean, it's rarely a week goes by without some form of liberal corruption coming out, but the ArriveScam app, dubbed ArriveScam now, this has got the sniff of the sponsorship scandal on it. This one smells like pure old-fashioned liberal corruption. So the ArriveScam app was originally contracted by the federal government to them, what's it called?
GC Strategies.
GC Strategies. Now, fun little fact, if you're following along at home, look up their Twitter account and look at who GC Strategies follows. They follow only one person, Justin Trudeau. They have one person they follow, Justin Trudeau. Now, if I was setting up a corruption scheme and I was going to create a Twitter account to try and give the appearance of being a legitimate business, I don't know, I'd probably follow at least 3 people. 3 people, maybe. But not just the one guy who butters my bread. So I did the math quickly. We were talking about it in the opening here about how over budget this is. It's not 738% over budget. It's 737 times over budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If something goes over budget around the office here by 30%, I might get a little pissed. But maybe there's reasoning for it. Maybe some things are unpredictable. Your legal bills, your marketing budget, But if something is more than 20% over budget, I answer to our board of directors over it. And, if something was double the budget for the year, I'm going to get some hard questions. And maybe there's a legitimate reason for it. But 737 times, or 738 if we're running out from the decimal here, 738 times over budget. I can't think of anything in the history of the world that has been that far over budget. The entire American space program, the Saturn program, to put a man on the moon, was over budget. But it was not 738 times over budget. Nigel, what's been the federal Liberals' response to the Auditor General's report here?
Well, they don't really have one. And I noticed that the responses in question period yesterday were very downbeat. They said what they had to say, but they weren't really trying to defend it. And in fact, the minister actually got up and said, well, just because there was a national emergency doesn't mean to say that people get to just throw the rules out. I mean, things were done wrong here. That's about as complete an admission of guilt and defeat as you're going to get from the Liberal Party. The problem where I think things went off the rails there, remember when this was put together? It was put together over a period of about 5 weeks in April of 2020. This was the period of time when all levels of government were speaking the language of war. We had to stick together. We have your back. It's going to take everybody.
We're all in this together.
We're all in this together, and it was there was a tremendous degree of hype to get people who, once the initial 2 weeks had elapsed during which we were going to smooth the curve, and it was very clear that the policies were going to extend and that the lockdowns were coming and the masks were coming. They needed an atmosphere of intensity and alarm and widespread fear. And in that atmosphere, this thing was conceived. And I think that it was just, look, do whatever it takes. Like, just, you got it, run with it, get this thing done because we need it. It's a national emergency. This would not have happened in more peaceful times. And you mentioned GC strategies. One of the pieces of evidence that to me seemed indicative of the state of mind was that the initial news story came out. There was this plucky little gang of amateurs who put this thing together in their garage and done it for $80,000, and here we are with ArriveScam, Canadian genius to the rescue. Well, that's not exactly what happened. They were anything but amateurs. They were smart operators. They got the contract, and then they found people who could do it for them, subbed it out, took a cut. This is what came out in the Auditor General's report, and then I guess as the whole situation moved forward, well, you got to upgrade. You got to keep up with the latest upgrades to the phones, and there's 5 different kinds of phone that you can do it for, and they kept on spending money on this app. The big thing that went wrong within CBSA was that nobody kept tabs on the expenses.
And the app didn't really work.
Well,
It was a disaster the whole time.
Which is amazing because really it was nothing more than a form.
Yeah.
High school students kind of do that sort of stuff just for the yearbook.
So, Cory, how much do we know about who GC Strategies is? They have a very opaque public profile. It has the appearance of kind of a shell corporation. It's got a Twitter account, which follows one person, as I said, just Justin Trudeau. So it's not really...
And it seems to be 2 people. There's no history of them being an app development company or those individuals having app development skills. As Nigel said, it turned out they farmed it out. They took... I mean, it reeks. It reeks to high heaven. My wife, Jane, is a bookkeeper. And when she was hearing this news, you could hear the veins popping in her head. She gets upset when I mess up with $20 on one of my forms for books or something. And just something like this to happen in the scope of millions, it reeks. There was no bid tendered even. These guys were just given it. I mean, they didn't even have to show that they had a plan.
According to the AG, I believe that when they applied for this contract, they cut and pasted the requirements from the government.
Yeah, there was no, and you could hear the frustration from the Auditor General as she said, this, 59.6 million or whatever, she says, this is just a ballpark estimate because the documents are missing and the emails have all been deleted. Now it's reeking of cover up too. We're getting into the criminal realm here with some of the stuff that's coming up. And I think the Liberals would be wise to get on this and try to play the victim. I mean, just get up and say, we're going to clean this up. They took advantage of Canadians because there's no evidence that it's tied to the party. So,
well, they would if there's no blood on their hands.
Yeah.
Because, they could say, hey, it was wartime.
Yeah.
And, some bad things are going to happen. Some people are going to take advantage of us. But they gave this out. Clearly, it was not a very proper competitive process.
No.
There is a place for some sole source contracting in very limited specific circumstances. This was not one of those circumstances. But I think is the victim card available to them to play? I mean, they attempted the victim card with the sponsorship scandal in the early 2000s, we recall. That didn't work very well. Paul Martin tried to essentially blame his Liberal predecessor. The public just saw Liberal. They didn't really care which faction of Liberal. Within the Liberal universe, they're like, well, those are different Liberals. Canadians are, but they're Liberals. Is the victim card here available for them to play? Or if they play that card, though, you
can only do it if you're not tied to it.
Exactly.
I mean, even then, as you said, it's under their watch. They're still going to wear some of this no matter what. But to date, there's been no evidence tying it to any Liberals. It looks like, some senior bureaucrats in CBSA. And again, the buck stops in the Prime Minister's office. But they're quiet lack of indignation on this, I guess, may spell that, or maybe that at least they're scrambling just to make sure they don't have a connection somewhere before they take the offensive, because this stinks. This stinks bad.
So Nigel, we have the Auditor General's report. Where do things go from here?
You will recall that
No one's been held accountable.
No, you will recall that the Auditor General was asked specifically about corruption, and she deflected the question by saying that certain things have been referred to the RCMP. That is where it has gone. So we will see. We will see fairly soon. I should expect that if anybody gets charged, and they may well be the scapegoats in the issue. But I come back to my original point. Once you create an atmosphere of panic, you can get away with anything. And that's the serious lesson that this incident, much more than the money's bad. But if you want to put something across Canadians, you just scare them and you make them afraid. And then you do whatever you want.
And something illegal may have happened. But the thing is, with these kinds of arrangements, it might be illegal in any other circumstance except when the government does it. For example, it's illegal. I remember. So when I was finance critic of the Wild Rose, the provincial NDP broke the law by busting through their artificial debt ceiling. And the question was, well, what happens when they break the law? The answer was nothing. It's a law, but there is no punishment to it. And so I'm not sure. Perhaps something, maybe something illegal happened here. But when the government does it, it's just almost de facto legal unless someone circumvents very specific areas in criminal law. So I'm not sure anyone gets has to be held to responsibility here.
We'll see. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a case to be made if there's fraud that has been committed, and on the surface, it looks like there's some evidence of it. But it's a matter again of whether there's going to be the government will to go after and scapegoat who's responsible, or if they just want to try and make this go away.
And if they go after them, the worry is then they're going to have to defend themselves. Yeah. And if they're going to defend themselves, they're going to speak about what the government said to them.
Yeah, they love it out of the cycle.
Do the Liberals really want these guys on the stand spilling all the beans?
Not before the next election.
No.
Around about the time that we get some action on the China interference inquiry, we will get some action on this.
Yeah. All right. Well, just the other day, there was a very interesting exchange in the House of Commons. Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre. And you know what? Rather than me explain it, why don't we just show the video from that explanation?
Under the previous Conservative government, everything was perfect, and what he is proposing to do is to make Canada great again. That is not what Canadians want. He is pining for a nostalgia that, quite frankly, Canadians do not feel. They remember what he did as part of Stephen Harper's failed housing minister. He remembers the people the rights of Indigenous peoples violated, the ignoring of environmental responsibilities, and the lack of an environmental and economic plan for the future. We're going to continue.
Canada is and always has been our country. And we want Canada to be a true north that is as strong and as free as it can be in every way that matters. The best country in the world. That's why we're here. That's why we strive. That's why we serve. Canada must reflect the true character of the Canadian people. Honorable in our dealings, faithful to our commitments, loyal to our friends. By turns, a courageous warrior and a compassionate neighbor. It is our purpose that Canada must be great. It must be great for all Canadians. It must be a country of hope and an example to the world. And only when it is these things, when Canada is all that it can be, only then can we say that our work is done.
So long before anybody thought of Donald Trump as president of the United States, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper said Canada is great and will be great, etc. So using the word great. And Trudeau says, well, this is clear that Pierre Poilievre, who was a junior minister at the time, was aware that Donald Trump would be U.S. president and campaign on a slogan of making America great again. And Canadians do not want that. They do not want Canada to be great again. I mean, the liberal voting base is generally not very sympathetic to MAGA and Donald Trump policy, language, etc. So that's fine. He can make the argument, I think, against, the conservatives picking up on MAGA themes and that. But to phrase it this way, that Canadians do not want Canada to be great again, that seems like weird politics to me, Nigel.
It's very weird politics, Derek. But I do think that in moments like this, Mr. Trudeau is telling you what he really thinks, just like Mr. Guilbeault gives away what he really thinks in our earlier segment. Mr. Trudeau, not 6 weeks after he was elected in 2015, gave an interview to the New York Times, which he said that Canada was a post-national country. And in the 8 years that have elapsed since then, we have seen ample evidence that the symbols of Canada before 2015 that we all responded to, he's systematically removed and replaced with other symbols more to his liking, or simply no symbols at all. He actually does not regard Canada he does not treat Canada as a great country. So really, when he says Canadians don't want Canada to be great, I think he's telling you what he thinks. He is projecting what he thinks onto a population of about 40 million, and he may well be very, very wrong in that.
I'm actually not sure he's wrong in a sense, not maybe in the way he thinks, but...
Well, then I hope you're wrong.
Yeah. I wish I was wrong, but I mean, Canada isn't a nation by most definitions of nation. It is a state, but I mean, if I like the thought experiment of if the world had amnesia, we woke up tomorrow and we lost all of the atlases, and we had no idea what the national borders are. How would we draw the borders around the world today? And I don't think Canada would exist. I think Quebec would exist as a state, but I don't think Canada would, because we'd speak the same language as our southern neighbors, similar cultures. Canada is the product of old colonial European politics. We were just the part of North America that didn't want to govern itself by the late 18th century. So in a sense, Canada isn't a traditional nation state, the way, say, France or Germany or Britain is. But I think he conceives of it in another way, that we're not a people in any sense, and we should have no real self-identity. We should be multicultural entirely, and that's where he goes. But yeah, you go back to the Second World War and you see what a little nation of 10 million people was able to do in the fight against fascism. But even then, that was two nations in one state. Quebec is its own nation.
Well, they would certainly tell you that, but the simple fact is, in the name of Canada, with Canada on the shoulder patches, 900,000 people out of a population of 10 million put on uniform and came out of the end of the war as one of the significant
and they were mostly Anglos. The Quebecers, by a large measure, either opposed the war or did not participate until conscription.
When I am in my cups, I do like to say that. But the truth of the matter is that the French-Canadian contribution to that war was significant.
It was, but it was in significantly lower numbers than in Anglo-Canada.
Well, there were significantly less of them to
I'm talking
offer their services.
Proportionally.
Well, it was a national effort, Derek, and I do strongly believe that at that particular time, a concept of Canadian nationhood had taken hold and was strongly supported by the people who lived here at that time. Now,
perhaps
the 70 years since, it's been taken apart. You know, we lost the flag. They changed the Constitution. They increased
we've even changed the anthem.
Demographic mix, changed the anthem. You know, these kinds of things. But in all of those cases, people would still argue, I think, that it was in order to reconstruct a nation, not necessarily to change it. It is only in the last few years but you've really seen the whole idea of the nation of Canada held as a secondary consideration and treated with contempt.
Cory, I know you and I have maybe different conceptions of Canadian nationhood than Nigel does, but I suppose we've maybe gotten a little off track. And
I
that's,
think we're kind of
we're a little off track
here.
But to what Trudeau said here, that Canadians do not want Canada to be great again. Was this him just kind of getting away with his own rhetoric against MAGA, or was this?
We might be reading a bit too much into a simple man. I mean, he's not good when he goes off script. And he's been told, and we can see that from the government lately, they've been failing when they try to go after Poilievre. So the instructions have been, whenever you can, go after Trump, campaign against Trump, campaign against Premier Smith, campaign against others. They feel that there's a weaker spot to go against there. And the point I think he was just trying to make was a sidelong, unscripted way to try and tie things to Donald Trump, but he tripped on his own tongue. And of course, it came out sounding horrific when you're saying Canadians don't want to be great. And, I believe it's, I mean, I agree. He's got this warped vision of a post-national state and things like that. But I think in this particular statement, maybe there was a bit of a Freudian underpinning to that. But for the most part, I think he just slipped up. But it's a terrible slip up to make when you're talking about national unity.
I think you made an interesting point there about how he wants to campaign against others because Poilievre has turned out to be a hard target to land a punch against. And it's not uncommon that liberals will campaign against the U.S. president if that president is Republican. Republicans are the more nationalistic party in the United States. So obviously, if you're not a national of the United States, you're going to feel less attraction to American nationalism. Paul Martin would regularly campaign against George Bush. Even though George Bush was not running for Canadian Prime Minister, he would campaign against Bush. That was fairly common. So I would certainly expect him to campaign against Trump. So let's talk about maybe how a Trump presidency, second Trump presidency, or Trump restoration, let's call it, could affect the next election. It's not for sure, but if I'm putting money down, I think Trump is going to be president again. Biden was the boring, safe candidate in the last election, maybe a kleptocrat, establishment Democrat, but he wasn't seen as crazy. But now he is undeniably heavily senile. He cannot operate as commander-in-chief in the United States. He just simply can't do the job, regardless of what you think of his politics. Some people think Trump's crazy, and maybe he is. But he is not senile. And Biden doesn't know what room he's in. If you have like a major car accident or something, they'll ask you 3 questions like, what year is it? What's your name? And who's president of the United States? And I'm not sure that Joe Biden can answer any 3 of those questions at the same time on any given day. So I think there's a very good chance we're going to have another Trump presidency.
Yeah, but something different this time is that Trump's not the unknown boogeyman. He might not have appealed to a lot of Canadians, but we also know during the 4 years he was in power, he didn't do much to harm Canada. I mean, what are you defending us against? I mean, perhaps people may feel he'd do some damage in the American area, but he's no more protectionist than Biden was or is. And he's not an expansionist president. He's not going to send the army after us or something. So I don't think those shots of trying to say we're going to protect you from Trump are really going to land that as well as they think they might.
Not that, but I think the accusation is that Poilievre would govern like Trump. And I think they're and the biggest knock against Trump is his own personality. Although people like myself like Trumpism, but I don't like Trump, the man, the individual. So it was really the individual character. And I don't think Poilievre is anything like him as an individual character. But I think the accusation isn't that you'd be supporting Trump and Trump is going to hurt Canada. I think the accusation is that you'll govern Canada like Trump governs America. How much do you think a Trump restoration, for lack of a better term, will hurt the chances of Poilievre in the next election?
No, I don't think it will. People are already starting to line up which side of the political spectrum they're going to land on. And if you like Poilievre now, you're not going to buy the accusation that he's really just Trump in waiting for Canada. And if you do like Poilievre, you say, well, whatever. Things were pretty good with Trump for 4 years, so let's hope they're pretty good with Mr. Poilievre. I can't see that. I can see them trying, but I can't see it working.
As I said, I think it's probability. It's not guaranteed, but I think probability-wise, it's a pretty good bet to bet on Trump coming back to the presidency in the United States.
It's looking that way.
Yeah. I can't for the life of me figure out why the Democrats can't say, let's get someone else who's not entirely off their rocker senile to be their candidate for president. But this seems to be what they've decided. They're putting great grandpa up again, not letting him retire.
To be fair, I can't see why the Republicans can't find somebody sane either. So,
well, the difference is the Republicans like Trump. The Democrats don't even really like Biden. He's just their guy. No Democrat is enthralled about him. The radical left of the Democrats don't like him because he's an establishment kleptocrat. I think it's just the Democratic establishment is afraid that the radical, woke, and socialist left of the Democrats will have their chance for a candidate this time if they put up someone who's not as old as Bernie Sanders. But in any case, I think Trump is a pretty good bet.
Yes, but that's actually kind of dangerous, because what happens when you've got a candidate who is destined to lose is that you find a distraction, and you have a national emergency, and you say, well, this guy is
Monica missiles,
something like that.
Well, no American president's ever lost while at war. I mean, it's a good incentive for having wars. And Donald Trump is the first president since Herbert Hoover to not have a significant war during his presidency. I mean, Trump stood a very good chance of getting reelected if he had have had a war, or if he would have leaned into COVID using wartime language the way other world leaders did.
Which war are you associating with Hoover?
I said he's the last president who didn't get America into a significant war.
Oh, I see. Yes. Yeah. Too busy getting them into a depression. No, generally speaking, it's if you want to get into a war, elect a Democrat. You got Woodrow Wilson in the First World War. You have FDR in the Second World War. You have Harry Truman for Korea. You have Kennedy,
JFK,
Johnson for Vietnam, and on.
The Republicans were the war party, though, for some time. By Nixon, they became the war party.
But didn't have to actually fight one. Nixon was the guy that got them out of Vietnam.
Largely so, yeah. And
So
without Watergate, probably would have got them out on much better terms. But certainly through Reagan, I mean, I love Reagan as much as the next guy, but Reagan was a hawk. Bush first, Bush the second. They were both hawks.
It's the old thing. If you want peace, prepare for war, and that's what the Republicans have done. That's what the Democrats have not.
Trump returned the Republicans to their traditional position as the peace party. But they for a long time, I'd say from Reagan on through the second Bush, they were the war party. But it switched back to the way it was pre-Reagan.
I mean, just to head off the guys who are already reaching for their phones, I will concede that George Bush took the United States into the war in Afghanistan and the war against terror. On the other hand, what else was he going to do after
Afghanistan,
the Trade Center?
We're way off track, but I'm liking this off track today.
Yeah.
Afghanistan, I totally had to do, but Iraq was that was an optional. That was not a mandatory question on the
backfire on them once things were investigated and realized.
And I think the result of that is one thing that propelled the return of the Republicans to the position as the not anti-war party, but the less imperialist of the two parties.
Yes, certainly.
Okay, well, we're going off a lot of tangents today, but I'm liking these tangents. But let's bring it back closer to home again here. So Pierre Poilievre, when he ran for Conservative leader, promised to defund the CBC. Very popular. He's been very clear on that. He gives these great speeches about, he looks forward to the day when they can close down the headquarters of the CBC in Toronto, and a family pulls up a U-Haul and moves into the C-suite. But he has, until now, not committed to ending the government subsidies to the so-called private sector media, the bailouts, essentially, that the Western Standard painfully has not taken, which is why you need to support us by becoming a member at westernstandard.news. $10 a month or $100 a year. But he has not yet committed, until now, to end the private sector subsidies. And I've suspected it's because, well, it's pretty hard for a journalist to cover you fairly if you're promising to end subsidies that are paying for their jobs. I mean, if I'm a reporter and 35-40% plus of my salary is directly dependent on keeping the Liberals in power, I can't cover the other guys fairly. I can't cover the Liberals fairly. And so I think he's been afraid of provoking the media against him by saying he'd get rid of these subsidies. I suspect, Nigel, Cory, that the reason he is just this week promised to do away with the subsidies to Toronto Star, National Post, Globe and Mail, all these guys, is because he's finally realized that they're not going to give him a fair shake no matter what. So he may as well promise to axe their jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two reasons. That's one of them. It's a big one. They're not going to give him a fair shake. They're on him like, fleas on a dog. I've never seen media so eager to keep the leader of the opposition accountable as I have in this last year, while giving a pass to the prime minister who prances out of the country or out of the House of Commons every time a scandal comes up. The other part, too, though, is I think it's becoming evident to Canadians in general that the subsidies aren't working. The newspapers are still contracting. The CTV and Bell are still doing layoffs. Like, the subsidies aren't working. They're trying to save outlets, and I've got a column coming out in a little while on that, from an inevitable demise. I despise some of them, no? And he's realizing that. Canadians are also realizing that this is just throwing good money after bad. Something needs to change, but subsidizing isn't working. So he's not afraid to go after it.
Yeah. Nigel, why do you think he's declined until now to say he would get rid of the subsidies to the so-called private sector media, and has just now said he'll do it?
Well, timing is everything, and one thing is you don't want to put all your policies out there at the moment, but it just seemed like the right time to point out that the media, Bell has just laid off, what was it, 5,000 people to get rid of a massive operating debt that was piling up to what was basically a telephone company. So he has no friends. It's like Cory says, he has no friends in the media. Why are we keeping this up? Put it out there. The base actually will love it, and they do. And you can see that from the response that we've been getting. 20 months to an election? What he is doing is taking them on. Have you noticed this? I mean, you kind of not noticed it. Like, he doesn't just, Harper would go to the press conference, take two questions. They would always be hostile. They were never simply a request for information. They'd leave, and they went off and did what they did. Poilievre is not doing that. He is going. He'll take as many questions as he likes. But boy, if you were a reporter, you had better have your questions in order and be based on solid fact, or he will make a fool of you. And I don't know why, but they keep coming up unprepared, and he eats his apple, or he mocks the toque, or whatever it is, and they go off with their tails between their legs. And now he has finally given them the kick in the rear as they leave. By the way, I'm dropping this, and you'll get getting a job, making toast for old people or something. Yeah, that's the end game here, to actually diminish their influence and the respect that people have for the media by just showing them up. It's working.
I've had meetings with politicians, and not infrequently they'll ask me. I'll put it this way: when I was testifying at the Senate last year on Bill C-18, the Online News Act, I was asked, I think by a Liberal, or not technically an independent, but a Liberal senator, what can the government do to help the independent media like the Western Standard? And what I said was, leave us alone and stop subsidizing our competitors. Stop subsidizing the legacy media and stop trying to help us. Just leave us alone. And that's it. So if Pierre Poilievre can end these subsidies,
more national advertising might have been might be nice.
Well, yeah, I suppose so.
Don't you think?
You know what? That's a good idea. But, stop subsidizing our competitors and stop trying to pass things like the Online News Act to help us. Because all the Online News Act did was get us kicked off Facebook. It costed us a lot of money. So
what do you think it cost the mainstream media? Because Facebook was paperboy for them too.
yeah, but not in the same percentages. It was because conservatives are more likely to be on Facebook, leftists are more likely to be on Twitter. Twitter's still there, Facebook is not for us. So it hurt everybody, but it proportionally hurt more conservative and right-leaning publications more.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And as a source of revenue, it hurt them a lot less because they're taking the federal government subsidies. So, and they're not really in the business of growing. We are.
But nobody won.
Nobody came out of this looking good. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. Cory, Nigel, thank you very much. And thank all of you for joining us today on The Pipeline. Remember, the Western Standard is federal government bailout free. We rely on advertising and memberships from people like you. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to Western Standard News right now and become a member. It's only $10 a month or $100 for an entire year to get all access to all Western Standard content. Without that kind of thing, well, we'd have to shut down or take the subsidies like the other guys. So please do it. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless. Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99